All right, my name is Maggie. I am a senior strategist on the pros team here at Ceros, and I work with clients on everything from brainstorming ideas to content road mapping to working on copy decks and education, such as today's workshop on best content practices. So thank you all so much for joining today. I have a couple housekeeping things as we get started. We will be recording this and sending around the recording later so that you can dig a little bit deeper into some of the things that we discussed today and that you can share with your team if they have any questions on the subject matter as well. And as I'm going through this, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or just make a note of them and I can answer any questions after the presentation. All right, I am going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, if anybody is not able to see this, please unmute yourself and let me know. But with that, I will get started. So when you signed up for this, you might not have been thinking that you were going to get really deep in some feelings, but that's actually kind of what we're going to be doing today. I'm a really big believer in emotional marketing and storytelling, hence the title, Once More with Feeling. And when I talk about getting really deep in some feelings, I'm not necessarily talking about your feelings, but rather the feelings of your users. And as we go through this information at different points in time, I'm going to ask you to tap into your user's mindset and to think about what feelings will appeal to them or might motivate them. So content strategy is a huge part of my job. It's something that I work really closely with every day. And I'll admit it, even I am sick of hearing the word content sometimes. And that is because, like most people, I am so overwhelmed by it. We are getting hit with content from all angles all the time, whether it's through text messages, emails, links that people are sending us, our own Google searches. Content is everywhere. And so it's no wonder that that's starting to affect attention spans a little. 50 milliseconds. So that is a fraction of a second. And that is the amount of time it's going to take a web user to decide if they're going to stick around and engage with your content, or if they're going to maybe click back to YouTube or Google something or go check their email. So that's a really, really tiny window in which you want to make a really great impression so that they feel convinced to stick around and engage with your content. So of course you want to use your time wisely. And you could have really great content and an awesome on-brand message you think is really well crafted, but it might not be that effective if you're not reaching the right people. And at Ceros, we call that determining your goal and your audience. So every project that the pros engage on with a client, we ask them to fill out a creative brief. And it's just to make sure that we know the basics of the project, that the Ceros team and the client are all on the same page, and to help us start to form that roadmap that we're going to take. And two of the most important things that we have on that brief are asking the client to define the goal and the audience. And while those might seem pretty straightforward, they're actually a little bit more complex than you might think. So I wanted to take a second to dive a little bit deeper into those and the different components of them. So I like to think of goals as having layers. And really that core layer is, what is the action that you want your user to take at the end of an experience or a piece of content? And it can be anything from downloading a full-length PDF to setting up a meeting, sharing contact information. Really, there's so many different actions that you can get your users to take. And then taking a step back further, think, what is the purpose of this experience and how is it going to contribute to your long-term business goals? And as you start to look at all of the different goals that you want users to take in different pieces of content, again, whether you want one piece where they're going to download a PDF, one piece where maybe it's a top of funnel experience where you just want to set up a meeting to start talking about information a little bit more in depth, think about all of those different goals and start prioritizing them in the order that you want to create that content. And that's going to help you start picturing your roadmap and the content roadmap and the order in which you'll be creating different pieces. So here's the thing about goals. Whether you're asking your user to download something, to share their information, to set up a meeting, just to learn more, whatever that action is, you're asking a favor of your audience. And the best way to make them feel compelled to take that action is to emotionally resonate with them. So think about, what do they need to feel as they're going through and reading your content? What do they need to feel to take that action? And what do they need to feel about your brand? Maybe you're a disruptor, or you have amazing customer service, or you're working on a product because you have these really brilliant minds and this product is just going to change how your users work. Whatever it is, make sure that that is also really clear throughout your experience. And lastly, make sure that your brand messaging ties together both that action that you, or the emotion that you want to evoke in your users, but also that messaging about your brand. So one thing that all of your audience members have in common is that they're digital users. So I thought it would be helpful to look at some digital behaviors or online reading behaviors that help inform a lot of our best practices here at Ceros. So first and foremost, the majority of users are going to scan your content. About 79% of them are only going to scan your content. And as a writer, that stat hurts sometimes. I like to think that every piece of content that I'm writing, or every word, is really impactful and is going to move my users. And the truth is, it's probably not. They're probably not reading every word. But as a strategist, I get kind of excited looking at that stat, because it gives me a lot of flexibility to be creative in how I present my content. Whether it's having a really immersive experience where it feels like something completely different than just a static PDF, or whether it's using tables, icons, and different interactive elements to really help my users stay engaged. And users value easy reading. I love this example from the Nielsen-Norman group. They study online behavior, and they took this paragraph here and analyzed how users respond to it. And I don't know about you, but every time I look at this paragraph, I get about 2 to 3 words into it, and then I'm just like, no, not into it. It's too long. It just looks like a lot of work to read it. You've lost my attention. I'm going to move on to something else. And the Nielsen-Norman group found that that response was pretty standard for most readers. So they played around with the formatting. They played around with word count and making it a little bit easier to scan and making the language more objective versus subjective. And they found that when they did all 3 of those things together, that engagement increased by 124%. So right here is your before. Like I said, it's not that enticing to read, but here's what happened when they applied all 3 of those things. And I don't know about you, but this is like a sigh of relief for me to look at. It's just breathier. You can look at it and it's easy to skim. It's easy to extract the important information. And you know exactly what information the writer wants you to take away. And as we go through this, I will touch a couple of times on bullet points being a really, really great way for content to feel scannable and just easier for users to digest. Also, unsurprisingly, users dig interactions. And this makes a lot of sense to me. When I think about back in my college days, or even my high school days, when I would be sitting in a classroom or a lecture hall and somebody would just be talking at me for an hour, and I had no opportunity to ask questions or to pause if I needed to. I was just kind of like frantically taking notes and trying to go as fast as I could while digesting all of the information and trying to make note of my questions. And it could be a really tough learning environment. But when I compare that to different experiences where I was doing things hands-on, or I had an opportunity to pause and ask a question or to just digest what was being presented, I felt that I really walked away learning things a lot better. And those same principles apply for digital. And users really dig visuals. Content with visuals gets 94% more views. And the good news is that I have a lot of different ways that you can incorporate visuals, whether it's icons, interactive tables, or really using a visual as the inspiration for formatting your entire experience. And I'll show you some great examples of that a little bit later. And lastly, users just don't scroll that far. So, about 75% of users' screen time will be spent in the first two viewports of their screen. So, for a long scroll experience, that's like the first two full screens. And for paginated experience, you're going to start to see drop off after about pages 2, 3, 4. So, what does that mean? It does not mean that you shouldn't do a long scroll experience or that your paginated experiences should only be 2 pages. But rather, you should be really thoughtful about putting your most important information and prioritizing it in the front of your experience. And that also doesn't mean that you have to open up an experience and it's just wall to wall text. But you can get really creative with how you layer your content. So, for example, with this brain graphic, when I first click onto this page, you can see that there's not a lot of words. And there's really not a lot of content on this page in general. There's a lot of white space. But as you know, because I've clicked through all of these hotspots, there's actually quite a bit of information layered within them. And this is a really great example of taking one viewport and putting a lot of different information in layers where users can interact with it at their own pace and when they're ready to dig in deeper on a certain piece of information. Okay, so how does all of this translate to writing for interactive? First of all, headlines are so important. And I say this because often I'll be working with clients and I'll get a copy deck that either has a placeholder headline or doesn't have a headline at all. And I want to emphasize that it really shouldn't be an afterthought or something that's kind of just thrown at the top of an experience. It should be given as much consideration as anything else in your experience. And that is because that's the first thing that your users are going to see. And honestly, it might only be the thing that your users see. So you want to make sure that whatever it is, it really serves as a great elevator pitch to convince your users to keep on reading. And when it comes to word count, less is more. And again, as a writer, sometimes that really hurts because I'll be really excited about something I'm working on and want to just talk about it and put lots of information in it. Or I'll be working on something really technical where there's a lot of words that might need to be in an experience. But generally speaking, the more that you're asking a user to retain, the less likely they are to retain it. So be really thoughtful about word count. And there's a couple different ways that you can work to optimize your experience while also heeding this less is more principle. Whether it's using bullet points, like I just showed you, to break up pieces of copy, make it a little bit more skimmable, or whether it's layering content so that users can kind of pick where they want to learn more, or whether you're just breaking up copy into chunks and using different ways, such as like tables for formatting it. So I wanted to show you how we format copy decks here at Ceros. So this is a copy deck for the experience that you're looking at. My colleague Daisy Carrington put it together. And as you can see, in each of these sections, there's really not a lot of copy. And she goes through and she puts in design directions so that whoever's building it out knows how she thinks that things should be formatted and her recommendations. But she also puts in interactive notes so that the designers can start to see, okay, this is how she thinks of this content being layered or laid out. And they can use their expertise to really build on that. And you'll also see that she uses tables to help break up the content and to organize it in different sections. She uses bullet points and also adds interactive notes, like when things might be great for showing up on a click or on a hover. And we really encourage you to let your visuals do the work. Again, this can be a really, really great way of absorbing some of that word count while also creating an experience that's going to be really interesting and engaging for your users. And you can be really creative in how you incorporate visuals into your experience. It can be everything from an image with hotspots, or say a brain graphic that's interactive with hotspots, or if you wanted to do a story on GDP, you could have a map or a globe and different countries where you click on them and then you get a pop-up that talks about that country's GDP or other relevant statistics. So you can be really immersive with your content, or it can be as simple as just having icons with clicks and hovers. And get really creative with how you approach your content. Once upon a time, we approached content in a very linear fashion. You would have a brochure or a hard copy of something, and you would start at one end and read straight through to the other end. These days, we approach content in a much different way. Users are finding your content and they're coming at it from all different directions, whether they're getting emailed the link, seeing it on social media, maybe they're just hopping around the hamburger menu on your website and they click over to it. So they're coming at it for all different reasons and from all different directions. And it's really important that you make your content creative, because the more creative it is, the more likely that your users, however they find it, are going to stay and engage with it. So next, I wanted to work through how the pros team approaches content and talk a little bit more about our process. So we all start by determining the goal. As I mentioned, we ask the client to provide that when they fill out the creative brief. So once we've spoken with the client and established what they've told us, we meet as a team and we make sure that we all understand this is the goal. We are all on the same page. And I highly recommend that you write it down. It might seem like one of those obvious things, like we know, we talked it out, we're good. But I find that it's a really nice reference to come back to if I'm feeling stuck, or if the project is maybe getting complicated or we're not sure how to proceed. It's always a nice thing to refer back to. And next, you want to determine the story. So not everything in your source copy might be necessary for your Ceros experience, but there are a couple of different ways that you can look at that source copy to try to extract the information that you can use to form your new story. So here are a couple of different ways that I approach forming a storyline. I start by looking at data. So whether there's really interesting statistics, maybe there's something that is really sad or upsetting or just makes my blood boil, or it's just shocking and I never expected it. Whatever those statistics are, if they catch your attention, chances are they're going to catch your users' attention as well. So I go through, and all of the statistics that really jump out at me for whatever reason, I isolate and I put to the side. And then I start to look at those and figure out, okay, what story are these specific data points telling me? You can also identify a problem. And this actually works two different ways. You can start by identifying something that your users know about and say, listen, we know that this is a problem, but the good news is we have a solution for you. And it's a really great way of showing that you're relatable and that you understand your users and forming a connection through that way. But you can also approach it from the other direction and introduce them to a problem that maybe they didn't know that they have, but is greatly affecting how they work or how they could work. And maybe you have a solution that's just going to make things a lot easier, more streamlined, whatever the case for your users. So again, another way of approaching the identifying a problem concept. And lastly, emotional resonance. And this goes back to what I was saying about feelings. If you're going through your content and there's something that really jumps out at you, or it tugs at your heartstrings in some way, whether it makes you feel really sad or nostalgic, or again, it kind of makes you angry, whatever that really strong emotion is, again, if you're feeling it, chances are your users are going to feel that way too. So see if there's a way that you can form your story around that emotion and really drawing attention to it. Next, brainstorm a concept. So you have your goal, you have the storyline you want to bring to life, but you need to figure out the right format to do it. So here at Ceros, we like to brainstorm as a team, and it's a very, very relaxed conversational process for us. We start by everybody who's working on the project across all disciplines, whether that's design, UX, content, a producer. We all sit down and we take 5 minutes and we sketch out our ideas. And it can be anything from, here's a piece of micro content I think would be great for this larger experience. It can be a larger format. Whatever it is, you have 5 minutes to sketch out all of your ideas. And at the end, we take a vote. Everybody gets 3 votes. And we look at the ideas that have the most votes. And that's where we start to dig in a little bit deeper and see what concepts could be really, really great for this particular experience. I want to side note by saying that you do not have to be an artist to participate in a brainstorm like this. I can barely draw a stick figure. So normally my brainstorm sketches are just like scribbles where I write what is actually happening in the drawing and put an arrow pointing to it. But the point is that it's a really great way to show how I'm starting to visualize this content and letting the other people on my team start to visualize that as well. So here are a couple really great concepts that you can use as jumping off points when working on your own content. And earlier when I was talking about visuals and I mentioned that I was going to show you some really great visual inspiration, this is what I was talking about, or just some of what I was talking about. So when it comes to comparisons, whether you're doing a before and after or showing the difference between 2 things, I love using a toggle and I love using this experience to show how that works. We get told all the time, clients are always referencing this experience that our Ceros Originals team put together. And it's really effective because whether or not you really like the Patriots or maybe you don't like them, they're a very polarizing team and most people are aware of that. So it's fun to kind of look at the 2 sides of the argument and see how those different points are framed. And so this is a really great way to draw your users in and to kind of continue to see the different comparisons for different aspects of the Patriots, whether it is their record, their fan base, whatever it is. So it's a really nice way to help engage users as they go through the experience and to show 2 different sides of something. Location can also be a really, really great way of putting users in a specific place and giving them a really strong sense of what that place is. I love this example from Time Out because it actually looks pretty simple at a first glance. This is basically the entire experience. It's all condensed in this viewport, but it's so nice because you can click into these different areas and get a little bit more information about some food in that area. And it really gives you a sense of the location in the culture. And there's quite a bit of information in this experience. But again, on this first view, you're really just getting this high level look and you can choose where you want to dig in more. But it really makes you feel like you are here in this place. And so I love using location when I can because I think it can be such a cool way of transporting a user and really holding their attention. If you want to talk about products, there's a couple really cool ways that you can do it, but I like experimenting to see how I can show the advantages or the effects of a product without completely showing a step-by-step of you use it like this, and then you do this, and then you do this. So this example is for a mobile charging station. And it shows a day in the life of somebody who starts out her day and her phone is at 30%. And as she's going throughout her day, her battery is dropping. And if you want to talk about emotional resonance, who here has not been out in the world when they've needed their phone and it's been at like 3% and the panic that ensues is like nothing else? So this really taps into that and that frustration and that stress and all of those negative feelings associated with that. But then it shows you the same woman and she's going about her day. And when her phone hits 30%, she has the ability to charge it. And then as she's going about her day, even as these things are coming up, she still has her phone. She's able to use it. Her battery didn't die. And it's a great example of showing how a product can affect somebody's life or workflow or efficiency, whatever the case is, and make a really big impact without showing the step-by-step of how to use it. And perspective can be a really great way of engaging your users because often you're forcing them to make decisions in a moment and to really think about things from a different perspective. This is a really high production example of a perspective piece, a choose your own adventure, where as the user goes through, they're presented with different situations where they'll have to make a decision, which will take them down a different path. But it's interesting because it really does have force them to kind of focus on exactly what's happening right in front of them and what will be happening next. Again, this is a really high production example of this concept. You could do the exact same thing with a flow chart. And in fact, we do that here too a lot. And it's still a great way of just engaging your users by having them make decisions and potentially thinking of things in a different light. And lastly, if you want to show something really nostalgic or how things have changed over time, a timeline is a really great way of approaching that. And one thing I love about this example is that there's not a lot of copy. As you click through each point in time, the visuals do a lot of the heavy lifting to really put you in that moment. And if you don't see any of this copy, you know exactly what point in time this is referencing. And I think that that's super powerful and a great way of really letting your visuals sing and help tell the story. All right, so at this point, you're really still in the foundational stages where you're discussing your goal. You've got your storyline, your team has worked on a concept. So now you can start writing. And I like to start with a headline because I view a headline as a North Star as I'm going through the process and working on the body copy and the rest of the copy. That said, I don't always have a great headline right off the bat, but I'd like to think about the headline and have an idea of what I want it to be, even if I just have something that's kind of rough that I'm like, okay, I know I'm going to come back and revisit this, but this translates what I want the experience to say or what I want the headline to say. A trick for headlines that myself and the other strategist on our team uses a lot is that we'll often write out a ton of headlines when we're first starting to work on a piece. And usually the first 4 to 5 that I write out are complete garbage, but they get out a lot of my bad ideas so that I can keep on going and come up with something that is a little bit tighter or punchier, is going to grab my audience faster. And then usually if it's not perfect, I'll find something that I'm happy with to work as a temporary headline, and then I'll continue to work on the rest of the copy, referring back to that as a North Star. And I'll find that it's usually easier to kind of tighten it up and polish it up if I revisit it later, if I don't feel confident with it right off the bat. And so once I have my headline in place, I'll start to work on the outline. And for me, the process is really to look at the different information that I'm going to include and organize it by subject matter, whether there's a benefits section or there's a section where I'm going to touch base about a couple of products, whether I want to talk about capabilities. I organize all of the information into different groups or different pieces of subject matter. And then I start to look at what story do I want to tell, in what order does it make sense for me to tell this information. And I literally go through and just make a bullet pointed list of like capabilities, benefits, about us, whatever the case may be, just so I know the order that the sections are going to come in. And then I start to fill in the information from there. But it really is pretty simple at that point for me. I don't do a really intense, detailed outline. I just like to know the order of the content so I can start to fill in those missing pieces. And then I'm writing the copy, and usually at this stage, it might not be a lot more left to do. It could just be polishing things up, making sure that everything's spelled correctly, that everything is really tight where it should be, breaking up content into chunks or bullet points, and starting to think about the interactivity of everything. Like I've said before, you can really lean on visuals and animations to help absorb some of that word count and to help with the storytelling. And so as I'm going through and reading the copy, I'll look at places where I can add interactions and add those different interactive elements, whether it's putting things under a click or a hover, or using a toggle, and I'll start to really visualize how this is going to function in Ceros. And then I go through and I read my copy top to bottom a couple times. And I do it to kind of temperature check things, because if I find that there are parts where I'm dozing off every time I read it, or I start a sentence and I'm just like, I just don't feel like finishing this, chances are that my users are also going to feel that way. So when I get to those stickier points, I take a step back, and there's a couple different ways that you can solve for them. So I always start by saying, okay, this information right now, I'm not sold on it. Does it need to be in the experience? And sometimes it just is a little bit of filler, or it doesn't feel particularly relevant to the audience or the goal, so I'll take it out. If it does need to be in there, then I start to look at different ways of formatting it. Maybe it's just a really long sentence that can be broken up into bullet points. Maybe it's a really long paragraph and I can put part of it on a pop-up or on a hover state, or I can break it up into different icons. There are so many different ways that you can break up copy in a way that just feels a little bit more engaging to users. But I really encourage you to go through and read your copy from the perspective of an outsider and pay attention to those moments where things might not quite be flowing quite so easily. And lastly, I start to brainstorm ideas, and I'll leave our design team notes in the Google Doc like I showed you in the copy deck earlier. And it can be anything from, here's a chart, are we able to make this interactive, to sharing examples of visual references that I think would be really cool, or just leaving them notes and saying, this was kind of my thought behind this formatting, let me know what you think. And leaving notes in the Google Doc for our design team is really helpful in letting them know my perspective, how I was picturing things as I was laying them out. But it also helps us keep conversing at all stages of a project. So when somebody's in design, if they have questions, they know what my thoughts were and that they already have that insight. But also when I'm in early stages, I can leave our design team notes so they can really hit the ground running, and that they're very caught up right when they get the copy deck. So that is how we do it here at Ceros. I know I've just talked a lot at you, so I'm going to pause, take a big sip of water, and if anybody has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute yourself. Note takers? All right, well, if you think of anything later, definitely let your Ceros contact know. They can always pass on any questions to me, and keep a lookout in your email for a recording of this and a copy deck, which should be coming to you later this week. Thank you all so much for joining, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I thought that was incredibly helpful, really well presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm so glad to hear that.